What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Riding Dad channel video, or welcome if it's your first time. Either way, very glad to have you. We're talking about blow-by versus sumping today. Roll that intro, get back here.
Riding down a YouTube channel, it's the Riding Down a YouTube channel, it's the Riding Down a YouTube channel, it's the Riding Down a thing that you found.
Okay, so yes, a lot of you who are watching this video are probably like, why are you talking about blow-by versus sumping? They're two different issues, although parts of it are interconnected a little bit. And yes, you are correct. The reason I want to talk about blow-by versus sumping is because I have had so many people message me or ask me questions, confused about blow-by versus sumping. They're thinking that the new oil pumps on these M8s are fixing the blow-by issue and everything, which is obviously not the case. We're going to talk more about it. And I'm part of Facebook forums and stuff as well, and I've had so many people on Facebook forums talk matter-of-factly. They're so sure of themselves, so when they say a comment, and they're actually talking about something, but they're talking about blow-by on the post or whatever, and it's just confusing the absolute hell out of people, which is not good. So what I want to do, and again, by no means am I a mechanic. I am not a certified Harley master tech or whatever the title is you get when you work for the Harley dealership as a mechanic or whatever. What I am is somebody that has a very good understanding of at least these M8 motors. I've not done really any work to any other bikes. The M8 platform is the first Harley that I've done a lot of work to. So what I'm about to talk about might not necessarily be applicable to some parts of like the twin cam engines and the older Evos and stuff like that. But the premise of stuff will still be the same. Just like I said, the majority of it will be specific to this M8 platform. So what is blow-by? What is sumping? Before we get into that, just in case you don't know, there are three compartments for oil on these M8 bikes. This goes for pretty much every Harley anyway, but for the sake of this video, the M8. So you have your oil. It's why when if you see oil change kits, and I know for most of you guys, probably this is old news, but like I said, this is just covering all the bases, setting a solid foundation before we talk about it. So there's the three-hole oil change, right? That's why it's called the three-hole oil change, because there's three compartments. There's the one compartment, which is where your clutch is and your main drive and everything. That is on the left side of the bike. That's where your derby cover is. That is one compartment of oil. Then you have your transmission, which is self-explanatory. You know what a transmission is. That's one compartment of oil. Then you have your actual engine oil and your crankcase and everything. That is another compartment of oil. So you have three different oils, and I know Harley sells the same oil for all of them. We're not getting into that debate, but there are three compartments for the oil that, when everything works correctly, they pretty much should stay separate from one another. Okay, so now let us talk about, we'll talk about sumping, because that's probably going to be the easier of the two to get out of the way. And in this video, I'm also going to talk about potential fixes and products and everything too, just to cover everything. So what is sumping? Sumping, which is not to be confused with simping, is what happens when there is an excess amount of oil, essentially, within the crankcase area. So what that means, basically, I'm trying to say this in as layman's terms as possible, kind of as easy, simplified one. But basically, there's too much oil. The oil can't get out of the bottom of the crank. It can't get out of there. So what happens when you sump is generally you'll lose a bunch of perceived power. Like your bike will just run like absolute crap for a little bit as soon as it happens. There's ways to see if you're sumping. You can take the, I can't remember the name of it now, but there's a plug. I'm at a loss for words right now, unfortunately. But there's a plug. Somebody in the comments, I'm sure, will say it, because I can't remember it now, or if I remember it when I'm editing, I'll write it. But there's a little plug in there that you could take out and see. There only should be a minimum amount of oil in there. If there's a ton of oil in there, that's one clue to see if you're sumping. Besides the kind of other things, your engine oil or your engine temp will get way up, because your engine is essentially being starved of oil at that point. And it's going to create a bunch of excess pressure. It's just a bad thing. That is sumping. So what the fix, and that is a pretty much all wholly engine dependent kind of thing. The fix to that, one, sometimes is a new oil pump. So those of you who are familiar with the whole issue with Harley, basically Harley's had several rendition of the oil pumps since the late 2016, early 2017 models with M8s came out. Basically, up until the mid-19 year, all those oil pumps were possibly susceptible to the sumping issue. What Harley's fix was kind of a seal and a different kind of style on the oil pump, but essentially, if you have a mid-2019, like the 2019 and a half part of the year, if you have that bike or newer, you should be good with the sumping issue. There are always some issues or whatever. A very easy thing is if something's messed up with the seal, that could happen because sumping, like I said, we talked about, is that oil being not able to evacuate from the bottom of that area. How it evacuates is from the oil pump. So if there's something wrong with the oil pump, or if there's a seal that is either damaged or incorrect or not there like it was in the earlier years, that is one reason why the oil pump can't create a good seal and it can't get the stuff out of there, can't get the oil out of there. So now that we talked about sumping, we're going to talk about blow-by, because that is for sure the more in-depth thing, the more thing that people commonly have an issue with, especially nowadays that we're in 2021 as of making this video, and most of the sumping oil pump issues have been fixed. So what is blow-by? It's important to know that with blow-by, pretty much every single internal combustion engine in the history of the world has some degree of blow-by. It just depends on how much, and it depends what your vehicle or engine does with it, that you are aware of it or not. So what is blow-by? Blow-by is it's an oily, crappy, oxygen depleted air and mist that basically seeps by the piston rings, and it's made worse with more pressure, because if there's more pressure built up in the crankcase, there's going to be more pressure pushing on that the air and the oily mist and everything, and breaking past the piston rings. So where that goes is out the breather bolts, and this is why I turn the bike around. So the breather bolts are the two bolts that your air cleaner are around, and on a stock configuration due to the EPA, and this is pretty much every single bike ever, the stock configuration reroutes that oily mist that escapes, past the piston rings, reroutes that back into the intake. It's an internally breathed, I don't know the past tense of that, system. So basically, because of EPA regulations, we don't want that crappy oily mist getting out into the oxygen, the atmosphere, whatever, not oxygen. So what Harley does to be EPA compliant, and like I said, pretty much every single other bike does this, what they do to be EPA compliant is reroute that mist back into the intake. It gets sucked up. Now, what that does, one, it's robbing you of a little bit of performance, because what we talked about what that blow-by is, that's oxygen depleted air, right? Because it's from the combustion chamber. It has just oily, crappy, gunky mix, misty crap in it. So you're putting that back into your intake. So you're robbing a little bit of horsepower because you're not getting what you need, which is pure oxygen, pure fuel, gasoline in this case. So you're diluting that mixture, you're putting crappy mixture in that's not going to burn efficiently. In addition to that, you're also getting a little bit of carbon, extra carbon deposits and everything. So there's some pictures on the internet, you can search it and stuff. I don't have any that are personally mine, but you can search it all day long, of piston rings, not rings, just the pistons and the cylinders, showing a internally breathed system versus a external breathing system, and how much carbon deposits are, on each of the respective ones. So that's what blow-by is. That's why you need to be concerned of it. Now, that being said, is it a life or death thing? No, not really, especially depending on how much blow-by your bike has. The reason the blow-by is such a big topic on the M8s are that the M8s are habitually known for a little bit more blow-by than other predecessors from them. So the M8s are already known for a decent amount of blow-by, and it could be made worse depending on how you ride. Typically, excessively high RPMs for excessively long durations will make blow-by worse, because you're feeding more revolutions of the engine, the piston, the crankcase, and everything. So there's more opportunity for the blow-by to occur. But in addition to that, the higher RPMs, the higher spinning of everything is going to create more pressure, because it creates more of like a foamy concoction from the oil that's in there anyway, because you're just spinning it and spinning it even faster. So that is why blow-by, or that is what blow-by is and why it is a potential issue. All that being said, there are tons and tons of guys that put hundreds of thousands of miles on these bikes with no issues. They don't have a lot of blow-by at all, and it's like I said, it's not a life or death. Some of us, like myself, chose to do proactive stuff about the blow-by. Another thing to note, a way of seeing if you have blow-by, a really good indicator is, especially on the stock air cleaner, for these M8s, if you just take off the filter, well, one, you'll see it if you're dripping oil at the filter, but if you take off the air filter and you see a bunch of oily residue within your filter, not the element, but the housing element, I guess is the best term for it, the actual material of the filter instead of just the actual filter itself, if I'm making sense to you. If you take that off and you see all the oil in there, that's a good indicator that you have a decent amount of blow-by. Why is that a good indicator? Like we talked about, those breather bolts that are up there, for me right here and here, those breather bolts that are going to vent that excessive crankcase pressure, that blow-by and everything, those are going to reroute into that air cleaner, like we said, and back into the intake. So if you're having a lot of oily mist in there, if your air filter is soaked with the oily mist and everything, or even in excessive cases, if it's after long rides dripping off of the bottom of your air filter and possibly getting on either your feet or down there at the cam cover or anything like that, those are all good clues to see that you have a lot of blow-by, even more than the common blow-by amount. So now what I want to talk about are some of the products. 3 pretty much common products that I'm going to talk about. Actually, I'll talk about 4. I'll throw in something else. So actually, to fully do this video justice, I need to talk about a transfer issue that's happening as well. Very less common on Softail models for whatever reason. I don't know too much about this issue because, again, this is something that's never impacted me. I've never dealt with. But there is a fluid transfer issue that people talk about. Again, more common on touring bikes like street glides, road glides, and stuff like that. What the fluid transfer issue is a transfer of fluid from your transmission to your primary. So now we're talking about the two that are here and not the actual engine oil, not the one that is caused or that is involved with something, not that engine oil. We're talking about your primary engine oil, your primary oil and your transmission oil. What this fluid transfer is basically a suction of the oil in your transmission through your clutch area into your primary. An easy way to tell this, especially if you have the same oil and you can't differentiate if your oil is not kind of color coded at all. A very easy way to do this is after 1,000 miles, couple thousand miles, take your derby cover off. If your oil is overfilling or even close to being at the overfilled level in your primary, that's probably a pretty good indicator you have this fluid transfer going on. There is a Fex, I believe it's called the Greg Williams push rod that they sell. It's just a beefier push rod to account for Harley's looser kind of tolerances as far as their manufacturing and quality control goes. That will prevent the fluid transfer 9 times out of 10, in my understanding. And then Harley has a fix that vents the primary to stop that kind of suction that brings the fluid in. I've heard 50-50 based on a lot of different people. People say that vent from Harley works. Some people say it doesn't. The downside is that vent is drilled into your primary. The upside is there's really no negative to it. It's not going to hurt anything having the primary vented anyway, so it's not like you're damaging anything. Some people just don't want to drill into their primaries at all, whether it be Harley doing it from the dealership under warranty kind of thing or yourself doing it, and I get that. I understand, but those are the 2 fixes with that, and that's the fluid transfer. So now you know the difference and what is sumping, what is blow-by, and I threw in a bonus extra, what is the fluid transfer? So now you are educated on all 3 of those. You understand the difference of all 3 of those. Now we're going to talk about some products that are devoted to fixing some of these issues. We already touched on the fluid transfer because that's a very small thing, but we're going to talk about the blow-by and the sumping kind of fixes and some products and what they're made to do and how they actually work. All right, so let's talk about sumping. How do you fix sumping? 1, you get the new oil pump if you have a beginning year 19 model and or newer and you're having sumping issues. I believe Harley's actually doing that for free as kind of like a recall, I believe, if they're just switching them out. But if you don't want the Harley pump or you don't want anything to do with that anyway, you can always go with SNS and fueling. I'm not 100% sure on fueling because I've never had one in my person. I don't know. But I know SNS has updated it due to some stupid Harley patent stuff. They can't talk about it that much. But the SNS pump is good to go right now. You'll have no issue with that. It'll fix the sumping issue, and I believe from what I'm hearing, the fueling will as well. All that being said, the Harley pump will fix the sumping as long as you get the newer one. I believe they're actually on a 4th rendition or whatever for 21, but it's essentially the same as the 20 and top mid-year 19s, whatever. But yeah, so that's the big issue with the sumping. Also, if you have a new pump and you're having sumping for some reason, I would be willing to bet my money on it that it is, because I had this issue too. And we talked about it in another video. But those issues would be probably due to something with the seal. Either the seal is missing, the seal is damaged, or something with the seal. So if you just had a new one installed or whatever, just double check that that seal is installed correctly and that it's there. That's a different topic for a different day, but that is how you fix sumping. We already talked about the fluid transfer between transmission and the primary. Now we are going to talk about blow-by, because this is by far the most ubiquitous product market out there right now, and this is also where people get hung up the most. So, number one, numero uno, is an external vent. So what that means, right, we talked about where the breather bolts go. They go right back into your intake typically. They're vented somehow, especially on a stock configuration. The easiest way to fix this, to get all that crap out of your intake and out of your engine, is to do an external breather kit or an external breather mod. There's tons of kits and DIY kits that you could do with a stock air cleaner that's upwards of, even 40 to 50 bucks. I think maybe tops 100 depending on what kind of kit you get. You can even go really cheap at a hardware store if you know what you're doing. But you could do a DIY fix for your stock air cleaner, no problem, with a kit or, like I said, any of the other options, and that'll reroute it. So you could either reroute those, like you'll see on mine, I have this hose going about here. And on mine, that's where it is. I vent mine to the atmosphere. That hose comes through the jugs and out the side on the primary, right where the shifter is, in between the primary and the crankcase area. And that kind of just hangs out there and vents to the atmosphere. But that is because I barely have any blow-by at all right now. Most of what I have for blow-by is pretty much just condensation from the heat and everything. And it's barely anything, which is why I'm okay with venting it to the atmosphere, because we're talking about very, very minute amounts of fluid coming out of there. So you can either vent it to the atmosphere like I did. You can vent it to a breather filter, which is just a little pod filter, kind of similar to what would be on like a small pocket bike carburetor kind of filter. Or you could vent it to what's called a catch can. The catch can is basically a can. It catches, pretty self-explanatory, catches all of the fluid that comes out of there. Different cans have different methods of doing it, but there should be some form of redundancy within the can to keep that pressure from pushing all the oil out. It's not just an empty can. They usually have stages of filters and foam and what have you, to keep that oil in the can and just have it be able to breathe out of the can, because there is obviously air pressure that's moving out of those breather bolts in the vent. So, external breather, that is one thing you can do. That does not fix blow-by, but it takes care of the blow-by coming back into your engine, which are all the kind of nasty parts of that we already covered before, why you don't want that in your engine, especially if you have a lot of blow-by. So that is what the external breather kit does. Another product that is out there is a vented oil dipstick. All right, so what the vented oil dipstick does, the oil, obviously that's where the crankcase and everything is. So when that pressure comes back and everything, it's all kind of interconnected. The pressure from the vented oil dipstick is basically meant to relieve that pressure when it gets there and kind of vent out. I believe it's a one-way valve as well, so it should not let air back in at all. So the pros and cons with that, one, the pro is that it's very easy to install. It's just basically a dipstick replacement, and then you route the filter. It's pretty a long wire. They want it as high on the bike as possible, I believe, to decrease the possibility of any oil coming out, so it can actually just seep back in. But yeah, it's very easy to install. It's pretty cheap, especially for what it is. A lot of guys do a DIY fix with kind of a one-way valve too, to each his own. But it's very easy to do. The cons is that sometimes a lot of people I've heard say it doesn't really fix anything. It doesn't decrease the blow-by at all. And then the other con is that it is obviously difficult when you have that to check your oil, because that is a metal fitting on the top and it gets hot. Some have the quick release valve. You can quick release the hose quick release fitting. You could quick release the hose from the actual dipstick, take it off, but then you still have a hose. It's just kind of a little messy of a thing to check your oil or refill it. But that being said, it's not a really hard thing at all. I mean, you could figure it out. It's just that that is a con of the system. The other con is that is the rearward most point of it. So if you're somebody that does wheelies a little bit, if you even just pop the tire up a little bit and just do a lot of hard acceleration, your oil is being sloshed to the back of the tank during that hard acceleration, and during that hard acceleration is when probably a decent amount of your blow-by is going to happen. So when your oil is pushed all the way back there and it's venting, you have more of a probability of having all of that oil get through the vent versus just the air, which is what you want to relieve the pressure. So that brings me to my next fix, which is what I have. You guys already know I have the external breather kit. What I also have is the Check M8, the Checkmate. I love that play on words. It's fancy. But it's specific to the M8, which is why they named it the Checkmate, and it's by Trask. What that is a transmission top cover. You guys should have seen, and by the way, every video or every product that I'm talking about that I've personally done, I will link in the description as well as the links up here or whatever, but so you could just go down in the description and click it and see exactly the install and how that goes with that. But the Checkmate, so it's a transmission top cover, but it has really nothing to do with the transmission. For those of you who don't know, the transmission, at least in the M8s, has different partitions, and you can see this up close in my Checkmate install video. One of the partitions that the stock Harley transmission cover has a little vent tube for, that is the transmission vent. That is the transmission vent. Right next to that is another partition that is separate. It is blocked off from the transmission. That is a reservoir for the oil to pass through. So that is where your vent and kind of your pass through goes from your actual oil that's being kind of in this part of the bike, the engine area, back to kind of the tank area. So what Trask did was install a one-way valve in that partition of the transmission top cover. Again, has nothing to do with the transmission venting. You're retaining your original little vent tube from the transmission, but you're adding a vent to the partition that is from your actual engine oil compartment, not your transmission. And that is a one-way valve, again, same concept as we talked about with the vented dipstick. It should allow everything out to vent that excessive pressure while not sucking anything in and losing the vacuum and sucking dirt and whatever else you got into the oil. So the good pro about that, first of all, the con, it's hard as hell to install because of where it's at. Depending on your exhaust and depending on your bike, you may have to remove something. I didn't have to remove anything. It's just I have normal size hands, I would say, and it's very hard to get in there. So that is the only con that I can think of with that. And it's a little pricey, but you are paying for a very quality product. I know my transmission top cover, I believe, actually no, it's still here. My transmission top cover was okay, but the quality on the Trask transmission top cover blew the quality of the stock one away. It is a nicer product. It's gloss black if you care about that. They do have chrome, so you can also upgrade it with like the stainless steel chrome kind of look also. But those are the cons. The pros, this is the forward most point of that venting. So like we talked about, under hard acceleration, possible wheelies and stuff like that, you're pushing the bike forward real fast, so that's pushing the oil back to the back. It's pushing the oil back towards the dipstick and away from the front of that area, which is where the transmission top cover is. So you're able to vent at the point in that system that has the least amount of fluid in it at that time. You're decreasing the likelihood of pushing all that oil out of that hose when you're actually venting, and you're increasing the likelihood of just venting just pretty much the air, the excessive pressure in that. So what the mods over here do theoretically, the Checkmate and the vented dipstick from a couple different companies, they alleviate a lot of that excessive pressure that builds up in that whole system and contributes to the excessive blow-by. So theoretically, if you did these mods and you didn't do an external breather mod, you'd probably be okay because there would be barely any blow-by. For myself, I did a external breather mod first anyway, and then I was still getting a decent amount of blow-by, and it was just kind of being a pain in the butt, so I went ahead and did that Trask Checkmate. Since doing the Checkmate, I have, like I talked about earlier, virtually no blow-by coming out of those breather bolts. Most of it is just, like I said, a watery condensation kind of mixture, so that is why I vented that. Now, Here's the third kind of caveat of it. You have people talking about, oh, don't do a vented, or I'm sorry, don't do a external breather kit and one of these because you need vacuum. Let me just give you my opinion on that, because everybody's got their own opinion on different engine builds. That's kind of everybody, you know, everything is opinion based on engine builds for the most part. Just you do what you like, right? My opinion is those are one-way valves. So whether they're being sucked into the intake at some point, if there's excessive pressure or not, whether they're being blown out to the atmosphere, if there's excessive pressure or not, those are one-way valves. You're still allowing the engine to maintain that vacuum on those breather bolts. You're not taking that vacuum away. There are some people that will argue it either or way. I can tell you, I have my bike. I know a lot of other people that have their bike set up in the exact same fashion with an external breather kit and then also a vented either dipstick or transmission top cover and stuff. So that is kind of something that you're gonna have to make an independent decision with and weigh what you believe are your pros and cons or talk to people about. I personally think that that is unnecessary, talking about the vacuum and having it blown into there. Like I said, those are one-way valves. You can argue it, whatever opinion you want all day, and people are this way and that way about it. This is my opinion on that portion of it. I will also say, I can't tell you just how many people are quite plain and simple just ignorant about the fact that the Trask Checkmate has nothing to do with the transmission. So either that's people that just don't understand how that transmission top cover is and what it does, or that's people that just have no idea what they're talking about with any of it. But yeah, the purpose of this video was to fully explain, at least to the best of my ability, and kind of keeping it simple also, what all these things do, what the issues are, what the potential fixes are and everything. So I really hope I did help at least some of you out that are possibly just didn't know what the issues were, didn't know what possible fixes were confused about some of the issues, any of that kind of stuff. I really hope I helped you guys. And to everybody out there that is commenting on forums and everything like that and has no idea what they're talking about, please stop, because you are confusing the hell out of people that legitimately don't know anything about it and are literally coming to there just for answers. You're confusing them, and they're buying things for problems that their bike doesn't have. They're buying things to fix something that their bike does the opposite of and stuff. You people just don't understand how much damage you're doing to the newer community of people starting to work on their bikes and understand at least this M8 platform. So I really hope I helped. It was an enjoyable video for me. I've literally given this kind of spiel on Instagram or YouTube comments and everything, I would say at least 2 to 3 times a week for the past couple of months, and I enjoy doing it. It's just brought to light how many people truly don't get the difference. And if you're asking questions, good on you for trying to understand how this works, because like I said, a lot of people are giving the wrong information. So if you're just reading forum answers and Facebook posts, whatever, you're gonna get, you know, half say this and half say that, and probably about half from each group are just completely wrong and they have no idea what they're talking about. That is a personal pet peeve of mine. If you don't know what you're talking about, just don't, you're feeding people wrong information. You're really confusing people. It's not good for anybody. So yeah, all that being said, the Harleys run great. The M8 platform is awesome. In no way was this a Harleys suck, M8 suck. It's just the potential issues, possible issues that they had, mostly with the newer year bikes. But yeah, I really hope this helped. If you guys have any questions or comments or whatever, please, in the description, comment, ask whatever the question is. If you have a more in-depth question where you need to have like a full conversation with me, Instagram is the best place to do that for sure. Make sure you check out my TikTok, check out my Instagram. Please like this video. As you can probably see, I'm sweating my dookus off out here in the garage. The Florida heat is a nightmare. Do it for you guys. Please like this video, subscribe, that would really be cool. It would help me out. You'd see cool videos like this, and make sure you turn on your post notifications so you never miss a notification when one of my new videos comes out. Thank you guys for watching very much. I appreciate it. I hope to see you guys on the next video as well. And until the next time, ride safe, have fun. Dad out.